Hi, everyone. I have a treat for you today. I have for you Jack. Jack is the most technically certified tech recruiter in the world. Jack and I, we've been speaking and get in touch through LinkedIn. He's a top guy, really, and I'm sure many of you would like to learn about the tech sector, the recruitment sector, particularly in the US. So this conversation, I'm excited about it myself, and I'm sure you will be too. So, hi, Jack. Happy New Year. Good to have you with us. I'm really excited for this conversation. So, if you could tell us about you, introduce yourself so everyone gets to know you, that would be a perfect start for me.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that introduction. That was very nice. I'm Jack. I've been doing tech recruitment, mostly cloud for 8 years now. I actually started doing Microsoft.NET and dev, and throughout my career I've probably moved more and more to infrastructure, and my sort of bread and butter now is Azure, M365 as well, and then I do a little bit of multi-cloud stuff. I guess my big differentiator that you reference there is that I have 8 cloud certifications.
Can you say that again?
Yeah,
Did
so
you
I've got
say 8?
8. Yeah. It's
Are we going to make that a switch and actually get into tech and leave recruitment behind you?
maybe it's a little bit of a secret though. Maybe that's my long-term plan.
Maybe a long-term plan. That, you know what? That's really admirable, because when you speak to people, you actually know what you're talking about. So you
Yeah.
are a subject matter expert, really. But I know last year it's been a big year for you. You made that switch from the UK and EU tech recruitment space into the US, as we say, into the
Yeah.
big pond. So, what made you make that decision? How it's been like for you? I'm sure it's not an easy decision. Would be interesting to see your thinking process to make that switch from here into the US.
Yeah, so I guess the number one reason for me was probably just a challenge. I've been working in the UK market for a while. I work for a business called Cloud Decisions. So we're kind of pure cloud specialists. Everyone at Cloud Decisions is Microsoft certified, and we just identified it as a market that we could look at, and I wanted to run at it and lead that. So I made the move and took the jump, and I'm just over, well, pretty much exactly 12 months in now, and really enjoying it. It's a challenge, but it's good.
So, what are the main differences you notice between the Microsoft, specifically the recruitment space here in the UK and the US? And I mean, any differences for you as well on a social level? I don't know if the weather is nicer there, where you are and the state that you're in.
Yeah. Well, I'm based in Austin, Texas, which is significantly warmer than the UK. So that's a big plus.
Okay.
In terms of the differences on the kind of cloud Microsoft ecosystem side of things, luckily for me, the differences are very small to almost non-existent, which meant I was able to take the knowledge that I've gained over the years of working the UK and European Microsoft market, and find that, in terms of the Microsoft ecosystem and Microsoft's business model in the US, and how all the partners work and roles and responsibilities and tech, it's all pretty much the same. If I had to really think and come up with a difference, I'd say that probably just the size. Maybe what's enterprise in the UK isn't enterprise in the US. A small business in the US is probably anyone that's less than 1,000 employees, whereas in the UK, that's quite a big company. So the size is different, but from a technical perspective, it's all pretty similar.
That's quite amazing. I'm sure that this point about the size probably is a big factor, because many years back, I used to work in advertising and the tech side of things. And we worked closely with the US market. So there was that big umbrella, Omnicom, which is a creative agency. And you see, there is that difference in culture between having that huge establishment, sometimes bureaucracy, sometimes things that are slightly different when you are into the nitty gritty. So I wonder, has there been any differences? So let's say that I'm based in the UK, in the EU, and I'm making that change into the US market. Have you noticed any differences in terms of the types of contracts, or maybe things that you expect to see, that you should expect to see in the contract that are different to the UK, or culture difference in terms of the human resources and that side of things?
Yeah, so there certainly are some differences on that side of things. Some of the sort of big headlines that I would talk about is that they have what's called a fire at will culture in the US. So, for example, in the UK, the roles that I was typically hiring in the cloud space, mainly senior roles, almost everyone had a 3-month notice period or 1 month minimum. In the US, there's pretty much no notice periods. You hand your notice in and you can start your next job within a week. And same goes for if somebody wants to let you go. There's no notice period. So there's a level of risk there, but it also means that there's an increased level of mobility in the kind of recruitment market. Notice periods, what I've seen over the years is actually when I started in recruitment, 3-month notice periods were really rare. But then as some companies started implementing 3-month notice periods, it meant that if it's going to take 3 months to hire somebody, we better put our guys on 3 months. So the fact that in the US, everyone's just 0, it means that from an employer's perspective, they can hire really quickly. What it does mean from an employee's perspective is there's an increased level of risk, I would say, especially in tough markets like we've seen over the last couple of years.
True. And I've seen there is also quite a difference in terms of the salaries as well. So I think there is that reward and risk conversation. And is it true they get way less leave as what's compared to the standard that we have here in the UK?
Yeah, so my experience in the UK is most companies give around 5 weeks. In the US, it's more like 2 weeks, 10 days. So yeah, it's a lot less. I would say the work culture in the US is probably a little bit more intense. If I don't know if that's the right word, but more hours. It'd be impossible to say who works harder, and I wouldn't want to make that call. But in terms of hours, speaking to candidates, it certainly sounds like a lot of people are doing a lot of hours, and not getting the holidays so much. But as your point to the salaries, certainly the salaries are a lot higher as well. So maybe the justification is there.
So you've been there for 12 months plus now, and I've seen the posts you make on LinkedIn, and I've read some of the comments you get also from the prospects that work with you, which is really impressive. And I don't know the ins and outs, but it seems you've already been making a name for yourself there in the market, which is really impressive.
Thanks.
From your experience, do you see more demand on certain Microsoft or tech skills in the US? Is it more like cybersecurity, digital workplace, AI now, Copilot? It's growing quite a bit. And from what you've seen so far, for the people who are watching and listening, what advice you give them to get into for 2025?
Yeah, so there are certainly some differences in terms of which trends are at which stage of progression. So, for example, to put it in real simple terms, it's almost as if the US is 6 months ahead of the rest of the world, or certainly the rest of the Western world. So a really good example of that is in the AI startup space. Also sort of edge computing, the kind of I forgot what it's called now, but it's sort of the microchip space that's being produced and is maybe sort of on that path towards
do you mean
quantum
the
computing.
the GPU for the AI, which Microsoft are now having the Copilot Plus PC with the inbuilt chips? Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
or is it more?
But it's basically high compute processing, like data centers, and basically the next generation of infrastructure. And that's a huge market in the US at the minute. And the driving force behind that is obviously AI. What I've heard from my colleagues and people that I speak to in the UK is that, guys are almost saying that there's a lot of noise about AI, but they're not seeing many businesses needing those skills. Whereas in the US, I would say that there's a huge AI startup space. And even in like the Microsoft partner ecosystem, AI is very much become a solution area that businesses are focusing on, as much as having security, M365, Azure data solution areas. So I would say that to answer your question on kind of where trends are in the US, AI is certainly ahead of where it is in the UK. In terms of what I would recommend candidates focus on in light of that is not just AI itself, because I think the kind of knee-jerk reaction is AI is becoming really popular. Let's go and learn about cloud AI services, or let's become a wizard with Copilot. But I think that it's actually really important to pay attention to the knock-on implications of AI. So, for example, one area that I'm seeing having huge growth at the minute is hybrid cloud environments. I think that as businesses look to scale AI workloads and they have increased compute requirements and increased storage requirements, and also will need specialist infrastructure, it seems to me that that businesses are starting to adopt hybrid cloud strategies. And I think there's a lot going on with VMware having a bit of a pricing nightmare in the last year, and a lot of companies popping up to take that business. So there's lots of other areas that will be impacted by AI. And I think it's about identifying what those are, and how, if you don't want to go directly into becoming a cloud AI engineer, what other areas are going to rise with it.
Yeah, no, I think that also explains the some of the announcements that Microsoft made during Ignite with the Azure Central and the Edge solutions. So more and more hybrid style companies that need these services. And I remember a few years back, I worked with a Microsoft client who was based in Central Africa. They do gold mining. And basically there is no infrastructure to support the cloud. So their head offices, they have M365 and they have all the goodies, SharePoint Online and the Azure and all that. But part of the business, which is on the ground, next to the mining fields, it requires processing, scanning, storing things on SharePoint that had to be on-prem. So the companies in that kind of scenario, sometimes I think we get it for granted that everyone have good internet and everyone is on the cloud, but actually hybrid is quite a necessity for some cases. So You mentioned that you are based in Austin. You've
Hmm.
been working from there. From the outside, when we when we think about tech in the US, it's always the Silicon Valley. You know, the California is the hub for tech. Is this now changed where we are today? Is there more states, more hubs forming to be, the new tech gathering spaces in the US?
Yeah, well, I think California is still by far the biggest tech hub, but like a lot of, I think off the back of COVID, a lot of businesses made the move to Austin. Austin, the reason I chose to be based in Austin
Yep.
is because there is a massively growing tech scene here. I think that there's lots of reasons around that. The the tax laws, and obviously remote working has had a knock-on implication. The fact that in the past it was almost like you had to go and move to California if you wanted to go and work in big tech or exciting startups. But that's changed, and companies are starting to move out of there to some extent. So yeah, Austin is certainly one that is on the rise.
Okay. Did you get to venture around, go visit places, Texas? Are the rumors true that Texas do the best steaks, or they've been?
Yeah, for sure. If you like a Texas barbecue type meal, then it's everywhere you look,
Oh wow.
and it's enormous portion sizes. So yeah, I think that's something that you certainly notice when you come over from the UK. But unfortunately, I haven't actually managed to travel around as much as I would like. Hopefully next year.
Oh wow. So one of the things to do, guys, if you go to the US, count the calories and join the gym.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure you've been following the news, all the conversations, let's call it that, on
Hmm.
Twitter about the H1B visa, I believe, and the tech experts requirement to get into the US and work there. So there's been a conversation going on. We're not interested in that from politics side, but more of a market side of the conversation. Can you share with us your views? How does that work? If we have someone who's based in the UK, they're good in what they do, the Microsoft experts based in the EU, and they have an opportunity that come their way based in the US. Do you know how the process looks like?
Yeah, so in real simple terms, getting a H1B visa is very heavily dependent on the state of the market. So if tech unemployment is high in the US, then the justification for hiring people from overseas isn't really there. So the market has been struggling for the past 2 years,
Okay.
and in general, I would have said over the past 2 years, it would be quite the struggle to get sponsored in the US. However, in terms of where we are today, in August 2024, tech
Yeah.
unemployment was up at 6%. I think December it was down to 2.3%.
Okay.
So there's been quite drastic improvements on that side of things. And there is the potential that 2025 onwards, it does depend on what happens politically.
Sure.
But from a market perspective, things are improving, and that will certainly increase the opportunities to move over to the States. The other things that impact it are, well, firstly, your seniority. So
Okay.
if you're a very senior engineer or architect, then it's much easier to get a justification for why they need to sponsor you, because they could point to the very niche set of skills or experience that you have.
Yeah.
what I would say is a real positive for anyone who has a British passport. A factor that really impacts how willing businesses are to sponsor people is actually sort of how quickly they can get their green card, right? So if you go over to the States and you get sponsored on the H1B, and then you go to apply for your green card, if you're from, say, India or China, the wait list at the minute for green cards is like 10 years plus.
Wow.
So that means that companies would have to sponsor those people for that amount of time. Whereas if you're British, the wait time is more like 18 months, 2 years.
Big difference.
Yeah, so there is certainly a benefit of being from a country that doesn't have really high wait times for a green card.
Oh, that's really a good tip. You said sponsoring. So is it like an ongoing thing beyond the employment where it starts? Do they have to pay fees, or do they need to renew like every few quarters as an employer?
I believe, I'm not 100% on this, but I think you get it for 2 years initially. But you need to have your H1B sponsored by an employer. That employer will take on a certain amount of cost from like a legal attorney perspective, and then also the sort of processing fee. I don't know the details of what those costs are, but yeah, and this also comes back to my first point of why it's difficult when the market's not great, because it is a certain amount of work and cost for employers to do. So if they can find the skills that they need onshore, then that will usually be the preference.
Here, the culture of work since the new normal is we started as remote. Some companies, clients of ours, they adopted that. As you know, where I am, we have the winning from anywhere model, which is 100% remote. Some of our clients adopt, 2 days in the office, 3 days, like a hybrid approach. How do you find it in the US? How's the remote work culture like? Is it quite common? Is it an exception? How did you find that like?
Yeah, it's pretty common. I would say that it's quite similar to the UK from that perspective, but I would also say that things are changing. There is certainly quite a lot of businesses that are going to hybrid or back to the office. In terms of like the engagements that I've worked recently, they will be technically remote roles, but their preference will be to hire candidates in state or within an hour or two of the office. And whether that's just because, they want to be able to meet up every now and again, or whether that's because in the future they've got one eye on going back to the office, only time will tell. But certainly there's a lot of businesses. I speak to so many candidates that reach out to me because their business has just announced that they're going back to the office.
It's quite an interesting one. I mean, from my perspective, because I see definitely the positive side of it. So I appreciate if you have someone who's early in their career, maybe they would learn quite a lot from being in the office and interacting with people in a physical kind of environment all the time and observe and learn. I think that it's valuable to them. But I also see the benefits that worked for me as well. The travel costs, the time we spend commuting. I guess in the US they drive more than using the public transport like we do here. So there is quite a lot of benefit. But what I've been seeing on social media, it's like there is a bit of a, if I could say, attacking the remote work as being something negative, and companies should stop doing it. But from what you've seen, really, it's a quite balanced, depending on the company culture.
Well, I think that what you pointed to there is the main argument that I hear for returning to the office. It's the more junior, early careers people that are struggling, or not even struggling necessarily, but not learning as much as they could. I had an interesting conversation recently with somebody. He was a CTO at a business who he pointed out that he believes the gap between the skill level and the kind of how much was learned by maybe your generation or guys that are senior now is going to increase, because of the fact that anyone who's entered the workplace after COVID hasn't had the same level of mentoring. They haven't learned from other people in the office. They haven't done stand-ups. They haven't done sprints. They haven't done get-together. They haven't had the quick feedback that maybe you had earlier in your career. And he was saying he feels that the risk is the longer fully remote goes on for, the bigger that problem gets.
Yes.
And I understand the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. Actually, especially for us, people in the tech space, as you know, engineers tend to be introverts. Their personality is not very talkative. Let's say it's when it comes to social interactions. Being an engineer, you are kind of direct and very logical when you speak about things. I certainly was like that when I left uni. But then I worked in the creative industry for around 10 years, still in tech, but it's not the MSP space. And I worked with, account managers who deal with the brands. And it's all about not what you say, how you say it. And that helped me growing a lot. So when you end up being a consultant and you talk to, board members, when you talk to potential clients, sometimes the softer skills, the softer side of things makes the whole difference. How about yourself? Have you, worked mainly remotely? Did you start, go into an office?
So I've actually been fully remote for 5 years now, and I do enjoy it. I like the freedom. I like being able to, just work from wherever. I've done the move to the US. I also spent a lot of last year in South America, working from all over the place, Peru, Argentina, all that. Back in the UK at times. So for me, there's a lot of benefit from remote. But again, is whether I did have my first 7 years of professional experience in an office, and I think that's when it's important.
Oh, let's talk a little bit about a topic that's of interest to you. I've seen you posting about it, talking about it on your LinkedIn, which is the personal branding for tech experts, utilizing LinkedIn, building that profile for you as a recruiter, which you are the link really between someone potentially getting their dream job, and you have contacts with the high profile companies prior in the UK and now in the US. What do you advise people when it comes to using LinkedIn, personal branding? What do you like to see when you go to a potential client? What do you like to see on their LinkedIn?
So I think in terms of the reason to be on LinkedIn, first of all, is because I believe that the market is changing from the way that we find jobs. I think that, obviously I speak to people all the time that are actively looking for jobs and applying for jobs and throwing their CVs basically against the wall and never hearing anything back. And there's a lot of frustration that I hear from candidates on that side of things. I also have advertised jobs myself and have just been, flooded with CVs, drowning in CVs within 2 days. And I know lots of hiring managers have had that problem as well. So if you look at the systems that we've been using to hire in tech over the past kind of 10 years, they've just become more and more crowded. The popularity of LinkedIn jobs today versus 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's just becoming more and more crowded to the point where it's not really becoming functional, and the same applies for other job boards. So the reason that I believe people should be building a brand on LinkedIn is because I think that if you look at the market as a whole, you look at society as a whole, that's the way the world is going. We know everything about everyone before we do business with them. If you look at anything that you buy, any service that you take, you've read loads of reviews, you've done all the research you need to do, and you find all of that through their Instagram page or their YouTube or whatever it may be. And for me, it's not in line with society. The fact that when it comes to jobs, we're still using these A4 sheets of paper, and it's a process that I think is in the process of being updated. So I think that you need to make sure that you're in line with that trend, and also there's a great opportunity through social media to build your network. And it's a really corny phrase, but your network is your net worth. And I think that in general, that's probably targeted more to maybe business or whatever. But I would say that's really, really valuable as a technical person. If you can build relationships and get your brand and your personality to people online, and you can build out your network, then the amount of opportunities that will come to you via that network, rather than finding yourself in a position where you're having to send your CV to 100 jobs to hear one reply. Those two realities are worlds apart. So from a career perspective, I think that it's massive. I think that if it's not something that you've done in the past, I think you can start now and give it a go. I understand that it can be intimidating. So it is intimidating for me when I first started posting on social media, on LinkedIn.
Your content is, I give it 4 stars because it's straight to the point. You look at the camera, you deliver what you have to deliver. I'll add your LinkedIn profile also in the video description so people can reach you. But it's to me, I like that style, natural,
exactly.
Delivering what you have, nothing over the top. I prefer that kind of content.
Yeah, and that would be my advice to people, to not overcomplicate it, to just talk about your own experiences. Like if you're a support engineer, you could post content about how you solved a customer's problem, or the importance of being aware of this problem within this technology, and you could build some really, really interesting, engaging and useful content by just talking about your own experiences, and that carries across to every position. That's how I do my content. You'll notice a lot of my content is like quote marks, speech marks of like a cloud engineer, and it will literally just be because I had a conversation with a cloud engineer the day before and they said something that was quite interesting, and I'll just turn that into a post. And I think that anyone out there, whatever your job is, you can create really interesting content for people by just talking about your experience.
Absolutely, and I definitely second that. Actually, your colleague Nick has been behind me getting into my current role. Shout out to him, a great guy, and that's been through LinkedIn. He's seen my profile. He reached out. We had conversation, and definitely. So all what you described happened to me personally. In my career, and it's always when someone comes to you because they think you are the right fit and you are the right person to something, you are halfway through the door, I think. So we talked about you've seen someone, you like their content, they're active on LinkedIn. The next step, I would presume, would be you asking to see their CV. What's advice you give for people to have a killer CV? So things that you look for and things people shouldn't do on their CV, but they still do it.
Okay, cool. So just one additional point that I think is really important about getting noticed on LinkedIn prior to that is the importance of getting your LinkedIn profile really nailed. Quite often I see people with almost blank LinkedIn profiles. So I think it's just worth letting people know that the way somebody like me as a recruiter or internal talent or hiring managers will often find profiles is through keyword searches. So one of the things that I always stress to people who are looking for roles is make sure that your LinkedIn profile is covered in the technologies and the responsibilities that you're best at. I often say that recruitment is a bit of a buzzword game, and it's sometimes a little bit silly, the fact that you would know as a technical professional that if you've listed that you're a M365 architect, these technologies below that are a given, they're obvious, but quite often the person that is searching doesn't know that, and they're just working off a job spec and they're searching via keywords. So I would say definitely get your LinkedIn profile as searchable as possible. Then in terms of CVs, resumes, as they're called in the US, I think there's a few really important points. One thing that I'd say is never pay someone to make a CV for you. There's a lot of CV writers out there, and my experience is you'll speak to 10 different professionals about your CV and you'll get 10 different answers, and some will say it's only what should be 1 page or 2 page or no more than 4 page, or some will say that it should be as detailed as possible. My opinion is that just keep it reasonable from a length perspective. 2 pages is great, but if you've got more than that, then don't feel like you need to cut it short. In terms of problems that I see sometimes, especially with really technical guys, engineers, developers, is there'll be a top section of the page which will just be a long, huge list of technologies. It will be languages and frameworks and cloud services, and it seems to me that it's almost every technology that they've ever worked with. I would say don't use lists, and the key word to remember whilst you're writing your CV is context. everything needs to have a context. If you're just listing a load of technologies, then one, if you list that many, they all become irrelevant. But two, listing technologies without any context is not really valuable. If you do feel that you want to put a list in there, I would, maximum sort of 5 technologies, the area that you're really specialist in. And even that, I would, try and add some context to it, just a short sentence around being a specialist in delivering projects using something like that.
Okay.
And then when it comes to the bulk of the CV, I quite often I'll see CVs that are split into different sections where it'll have like technical skills, achievements, projects, and then it will have roles, and then it will have like the dates of where you've worked there, and then the roles and responsibilities of that job. I don't think that that's the best way to do it. I think that you should just have your employment history, and then under each role, use bullet points. But again, make sure that each bullet point has the context of the project that you worked on, the technologies that you used, the achievements, your roles and responsibilities. So keeping all of those things separate, again, it means that it lacks context. Whereas I think that if you can have, clear bullet points that say, I played a key role in X project using these technologies, the project value was this, the customer was an enterprise scale construction business. People were reading that and they know exactly what you do. They're not having to pick information from all over the place. They read that one bullet point and they go, great, we want someone with that type of experience. So another mistake that I see in that part there, and this depends on role, but let's say we're talking about maybe somebody like yourself who's more at that solution architect level, or somebody who's even more along the kind of commercially driven side of tech, somebody who's heavily involved in pre-sales or enterprise architecture. What's really important to businesses is the size of projects and the value of those projects. It's almost the first thing that I get instructed to find. They want to hire somebody who's worked with this size businesses and delivered this size projects. So if you're working in a role where you have some level of accountability to the commercial aspects, make sure that the details of those commercial aspects, obviously NDA, don't mess up there. But giving a good insight into making sure that the person reading the CV knows what level you've worked at and the size of projects that you've delivered.
I really love the advice you gave there about the being, contextual with the information. I think definitely that makes a big difference. Well, unfortunately, also if they are applying online and with all the ATS stuff, they need to include the right term within that context. So we've started with that journey from someone having a profile on LinkedIn, yourself. You liked what they do, you reached out to them, they've sent you the CV, they followed the tips, advice that you've given us now. We're moving to the next step with you organizing the job interview for the engineer, consultant, etc. Which in our field, it tends to be now probably 2 to 3 interviews, maybe even more for some companies. How do you go about this? I mean, for yourself, do you coach people? Do you give them tips to prep them? There are things that they should do, shouldn't do, in our field, in our tech type of interviews.
Yeah, for sure. I think that what's really important during the interview phase is trying to make sure that the person going into the role feels as um, confident and ready for the interview as possible. I think sometimes interviews they're probably the best we've got in terms of assessing candidates, but they also do have their flaws. And there are great candidates out there that don't interview well. So my role is certainly to make sure that any candidates going into interview feel as ready and as confident as they can. So I always voice that to my clients, and I say that you want to make sure you're seeing the best version of every candidate you see. So let's have a sort of overview of what the interview is going to be. I will always ask candidates, how do you feel about interviews? How do you normally do? Do you want me to give you some tips and advice? And a lot of guys are like, nah, I'm all good. I'm great at interviews. Leave me to it.
Sure.
And some are more like, yeah, that'd be great. Let's hear your tips.
So we have our friend, the engineer, had their interview. They are getting the offer. Now I would like a bit from the inside, a tip from the inside. If I want to negotiate the salary, so sometimes you have companies that advertise a wide range of salary, starting from, let's say, 70 up to 100 here in the UK, or maybe in the US I've seen even more, from 140 to 250, 260. I've seen such huge gaps. If I like this role, I like this company, it seems the right move for me. However, financially, I think I could do better in terms of the salary, so I stick with them because I don't want to keep moving for financial, monetary reasons. What tips do you give people to negotiate the salary the right way?
The way that I go about it as a recruiter is I actually believe that the negotiation should be done at the start of the process. So a rule that I have is that when I share a candidate's resume, I realise I keep flipping between CV and resume. That's my UK
that's
versus
fine.
US.
We have people probably watching us from all over the world. So
yeah.
That's absolutely fine.
So whenever I share a candidate's resume, I have a rule where I don't use ranges. And this is a rule that I make pretty clear with both the candidate and the client. So if a client is willing to pay between 80 to 100 and I'm speaking to an engineer, and we go through kind of what their expectations are, what their other opportunities are paying, and I'll say, look, things can always change. You might end up with 5 offers and then you're in a great position to negotiate. But let's just say, as things are today, give me a number that you would accept this role on, and I'll go through all the benefits and all the bonuses and everything. And I will try and get that agreed at the start of the process with the candidate. And then most importantly, I will go to the client and I will make them very aware that they're interviewing in line with this number right here. So what that does is it means that when we get to the end of the process, we're all on the same page. There's no surprises. There's, in my experience working in recruitment, there's nothing worse than getting to the end of a 3-4 week process and then somebody getting offered less than they expected. So that does come down to working with a good recruiter, I would say, because not all recruiters will have the client relationships to kind of make that point really clear, and also have the respect of the client to say, look, let's not mess about. If you're not going to offer that number at the end of the process, let's not start the process. So that's kind of my number one tip, and that means that the negotiation process is usually quite straightforward. However, there are some times when we get to the end of the process and some things have changed, whatever they may be. They might be the requirements, they might be the candidate's got lots of different offers. There might be a counter offer that he gets from his existing business, and we need to go again. My advice there is to always negotiate via the recruiter if you're working with one. The reason I say that is because I can have quite sort of direct conversations, and I can be pushy with the client, and worst case scenario, they just get a little bit annoyed at me. They think, bloody hell, Jack, he's really pushing for this one. And I can have that fight on the candidate's behalf, whilst the candidate is protected and always, seems like the angel.
Is there like certain pain points or angles that you would push for a particular client when you're negotiating for them to get more salary? Do you use things like experience, or maybe he is the right fit for you for that particular reason? Is there like things that you see as a negotiation stand for the salary?
Yeah, so it's all about understanding the market. It's all about understanding what skills exist in the market and what the going rate is for those skills. The benefit that we have at Cloud Decisions is that all of our roles are, they're different variations of cloud engineer, cloud consultant, cloud architect. And we have lots of different clients, and we've been working with lots of different clients in almost exactly the same space for years. And we know where the market trends are, and we know what people are worth. We might be working on 5 different cloud architect roles at a time. So we know if a client is underpaying for a set of skills. So that's a really key point when it comes to negotiating. How that would work from a candidate's perspective is, I would say, explore the market. When you go out and explore the market and make sure that you know what you're worth. Speak to a few different recruiters, speak to a few different businesses. It can be difficult looking at job slots because quite often the salary is not listed, or it's a wide range. But just try and understand what you're worth in the market. Speak to friends, colleagues. If you're close enough to people like that, you can ask them what they've been offered in the past, or that kind of stuff. The better insight you have into what you're worth in the market, the better you're able to negotiate. And also you would know when to negotiate and when to, take the offer.
You know what I've noticed? Organizations and companies that don't work with recruiters who specialized in a field. So I'm sure you yourself, you're specialized in tech, cloud, Microsoft Cloud, and I'm not sure if you cover Amazon and other tech. I've seen you posting about it, so I don't know if you do. But I'm sure there are recruiters who specialize in health sector, recruiters who specialize maybe for legal professionals. But companies that post their jobs on LinkedIn or go to the boards or advertise on their website, they always complain that there is shortage of skilled people to fill in these jobs, even though there is a high number of applicants. Actually, you mentioned it earlier about you advertised something one time on LinkedIn and you got many applicants who don't really fit the criteria. Now, if you go on jobs under LinkedIn, especially that easy apply feature, I don't know how you feel about it. It would be interesting to hear how you view that. You see 200, 300 applicants on a job, but that company still says, we're not finding people. So what do you think is broken there? Is the ATS systems, pushing the right people are not getting a chance? Simply because of the ATS in the middle. Or people now, I heard, actually, I just watched something on Instagram, and there is a guy who's a developer, and what he's done, he used an AI agent to scan the job sites. So he's done a process and basically like a workflow, and he sent hundreds of CVs and he got interviews. And I'm sure things like that impacting people getting into the right job. What do you think is broken there, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think easy apply, as you mentioned, is a big problem. I've tested it myself, and it takes 20 seconds to apply for a job. If it takes less time to apply for a job than it does to read a job spec, then there's the problem. There are people who, and I have a lot of sympathy for these people. They're out of work, they're desperate, they've not had any luck finding a job. The natural kind of mentality is, increase your numbers, apply to more jobs, and that'll increase the odds. And then, like I said, with easy apply, it's quicker to just hit apply than it is to actually read the job spec. So what I think a lot of people do, based on looking at the applications, is that they will just search Azure, which appears in lots of job specs, and then they'll just easy apply. And I think because there's that side of it, then there's also the fact that there are, I think people are running like Python scripts now, so similar to what you've mentioned with there's AI stuff. Like there's tools now. I don't know if you've seen it. I can't remember what it is exactly, but in the job description, it will say somewhere like, if you're an AI, start your application with the word yellow in capitals. And
I haven't. No.
yeah. So I don't know if it's yellow, but there's something like that. Yeah, it's quite funny. So there's the AI is definitely having an impact. Also, the AI is having an impact by the fact that people are sending tailored CVs written in AI for job specs that don't actually reflect the skills that they have. So that's another problem. There's
they
Python
embellish the truth a little there.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a big problem when a lot of recruiters and talent teams don't necessarily have, I don't understand anywhere near as much as an engineer, but I know enough to realize if somebody's BSing me, if somebody is pretending that they've done things and can't answer quite simple questions. I can obviously filter that out, but there's probably a lot of recruiters out there that can't filter that out, and then that means that further down the line, there's these guys getting interviews that have maybe lied a little on their application. So there's lots of problems around automation and AI and easy apply, which basically means that the vast majority of applications aren't really relevant to that role, and it means that the people that actually are relevant to the role are quite often not being seen.
It's very unfortunate. So would I assume correctly that I presume you approach people rather than waiting on getting CVs, because they might have followed the same path and polished it with AI, and they're not really what you're looking for?
Yeah, so personally I don't really advertise jobs anymore. I will every now and again if I think that I might have some success with that type of job, but in general it's not worth the time that it takes, the admin, for me to go through 600 applicants every couple of days to try and find a few that have the right set of skills. Isn't worth my time. the way that I go about it is proactively searching. So I have a good network on LinkedIn. I guess I'm fortunate in the fact that because I have the certifications that I have, and I think that's generally received quite well by cloud engineers and cloud consultants. So I actually find that I have a really high response rate on LinkedIn. So maybe where other recruiters might get ignored by cloud consultants, I think for me, they'll see, what's that, 8 times cloud certified recruiter. That's maybe worth having a conversation. So for
Absolutely.
me, direct outreach is much better than job adverts.
That definitely makes sense. By the way, it's probably something worth looking into for you and the team. I was reading about a new LinkedIn M365 integration that's coming at some stage. So basically what that does, there is the Viva suite in the M365, which is aspects of it is used by human resources. And from what I understand now, you could get insights from LinkedIn for potential recruits for jobs that are, similar to what you do, to your work culture. You get it right through within Viva. Of course, there will be licensing. It's not rolled out yet. But I think that would be an interesting thing to look into.
Yeah, that would be interesting, because what's interesting about LinkedIn is they're generally very anti-integration. But I guess because they're owned by Microsoft, that is an integration that makes sense for them. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what that looks like.
One big family. We talked a little bit on the not so great aspect of AI. Is there any tools that you recommend for people to use that you see add value when it comes to their online profiles or CVs? You did say you don't like people hiring, specialists between quotes to write for them. Is there tools that you come across that you find useful?
Yeah, I mean, I do use ChatGPT quite a lot just in like my daily workflows, but to be honest, more just to get answers for things, and because I lead the US side of things, I spend a lot of time on ChatGPT trying to understand US compliance and contracts and all that kind of stuff. So I certainly almost couldn't live without ChatGPT today. But when it comes to content, I would recommend using it maybe from like a ideas, topics type perspective if you wanted to. But I think that it's really important actually to write in your own voice, and I think that what's just as important as actually getting your brand out there, it's developing the skill of promoting your own brand. So I almost feel like you don't want to outsource that to AI. Maybe that's an old-fashioned perspective, but I really see the value in kind of going through the process of maybe being a bit crap at writing content to begin with, and slowly getting better and figuring out what works your own way rather than outsourcing that.
Absolutely. And imagine if you're applying to all these jobs and you are using AI to tailor, and you don't know what's going on, and you end up getting an interview and they ask you something and you'll be blanked. You don't know what you put there. You lose your opportunity because you didn't write it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there's lots of amazing use cases for AI. I'm not sure if job searching and your own personal brand is really an area to use it in my opinion.
So away from AI, a question probably that's a traditional, and it's a question I ask all my guests. Do you have book recommendations that you make for people to have on their list this year, whether in your field, fiction? Just tell us.
Yeah. So I'm an avid Audible user. So
So
I
am
don't
I.
read, but yeah. Okay, cool. So I've just finished Indistractable
Okay.
by Nir Eyal, Nireyal. So that was really, really helpful. As the name suggests, it's very much around building process and workflows around not getting distracted in the world that we live in today. So there's lots around how you can optimize kind of your work performance, but then it's also very focused to personal life as well.
Okay.
So how you can make sure that you're focusing on your career, focusing on your health, focusing on your relationships, and maybe reducing the amount of time that you spend doing things that aren't really beneficial to any of those important goals.
So now my plan is to have all the amazing guests that are coming through like yourself giving us these books. I should read all the recommendations I get, and let's see how much I
Cool.
can go through by the end of the year. Any exciting plans for you 2025? Any projects you're looking to launch? You would like people to get in touch?
Yes. So I am considering a podcast.
Nice. Tell
It's
us.
still
What are you
okay.
thinking?
So I'd like to hear your honest opinion.
Of course, go ahead.
The title is Certified and Confused. So it's sort of the tagline is about me being an 8 times certified cloud recruiter, but still confused, and
Okay.
I thinking of, rather than it being a 1-to-1, for it to be maybe 2 or even 3, maybe 2 or 3 MVPs on it at a time, 2 or 3 startup leaders on at a time, 2 or 3 cloud leaders, cloud sales leaders, and offering the value of people being introduced to each other, but then also the format would be sort of an initial quick round fire questions from me, but then also those guys having questions prepared for each other, and I would almost take a little bit of a back seat at some points, and treating it as a little bit of maybe more of a round table, or if it's 3, a triangle table, and something different to a normal podcast. So I'm thinking about doing that. What do you think? Do you think that could
like
work?
A very creative idea. I like it. Especially, I think with that approach, you could do lots of reels and shorts. Especially for LinkedIn, like this, a quick round, even though you have a long format podcast with that style, but you actually could take sections from it and repurpose it. Sounds like a very creative idea. I would love to see it. However, my honest feedback, the challenge you will have is scheduling. And this is something that I'm now experiencing, given like I'm also introducing the podcast element to my social media. So having one person is a challenge. Imagine getting 2 or 3 available at the same slot at the same time. If you can make it work, I think the idea is great.
Yeah, well, let's see. You're right though. The biggest challenge that we all have is time, right? So it's first of all finding the time to kind of even get going with that idea, and then it's finding the time to to make it successful.
You are pretty much in the podcast capital of the world in Austin. I hear that most podcasts actually move into Austin now, so I'm sure there will be a lot of talent and infrastructure around you to utilize.
Yeah, well, I'll just pop over to Joe Rogan's office and I'll record it there, shall I?
He's a big fan of AI, actually. If you see some of his episodes, he always loads up ChatGPT and start asking questions. And what I love about him, he gets really amazed because he's not a technical person. So he gets really amazed when he sees AI in action.
Yeah. All right, well, I'll drop him an email then.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? If you launch the podcast, also send me the link. I would love to see it and also share it with my viewers here. But it's been really beautiful. I would call beautiful, informative conversation today. And thank you for joining us. And hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been great. This has been my first appearance on a podcast. So thank you very much for having me on.
Pleasure.